on both of us right now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Whew. That was stressful.
Yeah.
Yes, come back. Jamilah's joining us.
Oh, good.
Thank you for everyone who was so patient. We apologize. Okay. Whew. We are here. We said 7:15, 7:22. You know what? For a group of folks of color, that's not so bad. I'm not mad about it.
Yeah.
So we are here. Jamilah's going to join us in one moment, and we're going to go ahead and begin. We're going to give folks a chance to join us. And I'm going to share this to my own page and say that we're starting now because it actually worked.
Mm-hmm. It looks like there's a slight delay. It's so weird between our Zoom and the actual Facebook Live, but
okay, at least we're live. Very good news. Okay,
so I just can't look at the Facebook live stream because it's like 15 seconds behind.
Minimize it so it doesn't weird you out.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, we are here.
Awesome.
We are live. Yes, and we are all here officially.
Wonderful.
Okay, we're just going to go ahead and jump in because we're here. We did it.
I can see meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Yes.
Lovely.
I was saying, I was like, we're all folks of color. So honestly, less than 10 minutes late is not so bad.
I know.
We are so on time right now.
Like,
we are
I'm
so
proud.
on time.
We're more on top of this than our government has been about the coronavirus.
Amen.
So, you
know how swiftly we move into action to fix a solution. How swiftly we move to online action, perhaps.
We are on top of it.
Plug it in the laptop.
I love it.
All right. Well, while we're getting situated, we're going to go ahead and do some introductions. As you all can see, our giftings do not lie in technology. They lie in other places. And so hopefully that will be of help this evening as we try and navigate some of this conversation. But I'm going to let my co-hosts go ahead and introduce themselves, and then I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I figure if you want to do your names, your pronouns, a little bit about what brings you to this conversation and what particular like part of your background how lends you to have some knowledge for how we can proceed in terms of community care and justice and really putting it into practice while we address the current crisis in our country and countries around the world. Jonathan, do you want to begin and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Reverend Jonathan Vanderbach. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I am a minister in upstate New York, and I am also a clinical psychotherapist who specializes in systems theory and studying chronic anxiety. So what I hope to bring to this conversation, I think there's a plethora of resources as to kind of the practical steps for people to be taking. Wash your hands, use hand sanitizer if possible, social distancing, but there's not a lot in this conversation about addressing the role anxiety has and helping us kind of sort out what is fact and what is kind of speculation, and the ways anxiety really makes that difficult for us to distinguish between the different. So that's what I'm hoping to bring to this conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, cool kids. I'm Jameelah. Some people know me on the internet as TJ. Some people know me on the internet as Sunny Day Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. To sum up what I do, I read a lot and I talk a lot. I am a PhD student in English at URM. I got my master's in African American Studies at URM. And I think what I can bring to this conversation is a context of how this is new, but this is also not new. And the ways that we, as people of color specifically, have always been making $1 out of 15 cents is how we are going to get through this as a community. And I'm a creative in the sense that what the internet would call a creative. I'm a poet, I'm a writer, think of a different way to do this kind of person. And I think that's the kind of people that we need making decisions, because we can't do what we've always done for something that's never happened before. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. And for those that don't know me, my name is AnaYelsi Velasco-Sanchez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the founder of En Conjunto, which is the group that's hosting us this evening. My background is in community organizing. And really in recent years, it's been specifically around conversations having to do with racial justice, decolonization, and now what healing justice, the role that plays in how we do what we do and how we can do it well and stay healthy and stay whole and pursue some mutual healing with one another. And so that's really what's bringing me to this conversation is I want to talk about, off camera, we were saying that, of course, folks are texting me right now. Off camera, we were saying that, the government has not been there for us, particularly here in the United States, that businesses, while some are doing something for those in their community, as a generalization, they're not here for us either. They're not going to be the solution to how we take care of ourselves during a crisis. So the question becomes, how do we do it? How do we be the ones that are helping? How do we take care of one another? How do we make sure that our needs are being met, that those that are on the furthest margins of society, that those are at the greatest risk, are being cared for and not forgotten during this time? And so in that conversation, there's a few things that we wanted to touch on this evening around the issues of racism and xenophobia, specifically to the Asian American community here in the US, where we've, we'll get into this as we get to that part of the conversation, but we've seen increases in hate crimes. We've seen businesses losing money and patronage. We've seen a lot of folks basically getting a really painful reminder that they're seen as other. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what this means in terms of disability justice. Really, there's a lot of provisions and concern and care being taken right now, which are necessary and important, but that we're being asked for years upon years by those who are working on disability justice, those in the disabled community, and getting told, no, that's too hard, that's too difficult. But suddenly when it, affects those in dominant culture, it's possible. We're going to talk about that. And then we're just going to talk about this idea of community care. What is community care? How do we practice it? So that's a lot. We're not looking to provide you with all of the answers. If there's things that you want to share, please put them in the comments because we want to hear it. We want you to contribute to this. That includes if you have questions, we want to hear those as well. And this is really just about not getting too heavy into theory and talking about action. How do we put these things into practice? What are tangible ways that we can do the things we want to do? Sometimes what's really hard when a crisis is happening is you hear everything that's wrong, everything that's not available, everything that's failing, and you're not given alternatives, and you're not told the ways in which you as an individual might be able to contribute to making things better. And so we want to offer some of that to you to the best of our knowledge and the community knowledge that we're going to bring together for those that are a part of this conversation. So, of course, people messaging me, I apologize. You may have noticed that Jonathan is not the face that you saw on our flyer earlier. Angie Hong is the face on our flyer earlier. Angie is still going to join us, and we're so excited to have her do that later. She had a prior engagement and can't be with us for at least another 30 minutes. We had wanted Jonathan to join us, and he wasn't going to be able to, and now he is. So it kind of worked out perfectly that we get both of these people that I'd asked to be a part of this conversation, because they each bring like individual knowledge and experience that I think are really crucial. So I think that's going to work out perfectly. I'm going to pause there and just open us up to the question of what are we talking about when we say community care? How does that differ from self-care? So if I can ask you to share, Jameelah, if you want to start first, because I know you've shared some words about this earlier on your own social media, how you understand community care and why that language and that practice is important in this particular time.
So, good question.
Yeah. Start right in.
Listen,
yeah,
right?
Time
just like, hello, hi. What's the difference between self-care and community care? Community care, in the most regular way I can put it, because that's the way I think, is taking care of each other in real practical ways. A lot of us grew up churchy. For me, it's the difference between someone being hungry and saying, I'll pray that food comes, but community care is saying, I will bring you food, right? Like that's a very, to me, that's a very direct difference between anything else we're talking about and community care. Self-care, it's floating around on the internet, on Instagram and Facebook, and you like those posts and you share them and you add them to your Pinterest board and all of that stuff. Self-care, I think it's important to get back to what I think is the original meaning of that. Audre Lorde, one of my favorite authors, a Black lesbian writer, she put out this book of essays called The Cancer Journals. She was diagnosed with cancer, and because she was also a freelance working writer and professor in a lot of ways, did not have the money to be taken care of by the medical system. She did not have the funds to take care of, for the medical system to take care of her. And so as she was literally taking care of herself, that is where we get self-care from. Like, how is it that I can do the things that quite literally the medical system will not do for me? What does it mean to keep myself comfortable, to manage my pain? All of this stuff is what she's talking about in these cancer journals, which is where we get that quote from. Self-care is not an act of something, but it's a radical something. Anyway, that quote that we see about self-care, if you type in Audre Lorde quote, that's the first one that comes up. But even in that definition of self-care, it's very obvious that this is the self-care that you're doing because the system will not take care of you unless you got some money. And in all other cases, unless you're a white man, you know what I mean? Unless you're a white man with money, the system is not taking care of you. And so even in that context, we still mess up self-care a little bit, because the context of that is not necessarily like, I need a break. Vacation and PTO and intentional self-care are different things. And so even when you take that definition and shift it to community care, that's the definition I place on community. What are the things that I'm doing for the people around me that I know the powers that be are either going to drag their feet doing or not doing at all? And for me, that's why this is really important right now. I mean, they're charging $7,000 for the COVID test in some states, much less treatment, medication, anything that comes with being physically ill in that way. The government ain't providing these things that we need right now. So for me, community care is, what are we doing for each other that the powers that be are not going to do for us?
Do you want to add anything to that, Jonathan?
Ditto.
And I will say, someone, KP Martinez, commented with the Audre Lorde quote, which is, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare.
Thanks, KP.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. Speaking of being churchy, I'll use my churchy language. I just want to echo that. Co-signed. Yeah, and I would say we, even in justice spaces, we do a really good job about talking about self-care. We may not always practice it well, but we're doing a really good job talking about it. Right. Community care, we're less inclined to even speak about it, let alone practice it. But in times when we're hurting as an entire community, this is when it becomes crucial. And so that's the reason we wanted to have this conversation. There are some ways in which we can actually do that for one another, particularly for those that, again, are going to be forgotten in the process, in the midst of our own fear, our own apprehension, our own anxiety. It's really hard to remember, well, wait, I not only want to take care of myself, I want to take care of others. And not just those that are of most importance to me, but those that are in the most need, regardless of their actual proximity to me. And so that becomes a more difficult conversation. So before we get further into like, what are the practicalities of how we can do that, I wanted to jump around a bit and talk in more depth about these things that we're responding to with community care, or these things that we're responding to with acts of justice. So I think we're gonna hold off on our conversation around xenophobia and racism until Angie can join us as well. So I would love to start with a conversation about disability justice. And I think I appreciate that you both can speak to this from very different places. I think you in particular, Jonathan, from the mental health side of things, and Jameelah, I know you've talked quite a bit about other forms of disability justice. And so I have some of my own experiences and concerns where this is concerned. Yeah. And so I'll just say what I said earlier, and I want to hear your responses to it. The idea that we now suddenly have the capability and the willingness to do what needs to be done to make things accessible to as many people as possible, putting classes online, making meetings into emails, into Zoom calls, using disposable items when before we were suddenly absolutely anti-disposable items. All these different things we're suddenly very willing to do when those in the disability justice community have been asking us to do them, and we did not make the time or did not have the willingness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, right, so from the mental health component, and I'm going to bring it back even a little bit before, because I think that is the culmination, right? I want to go all the way back to kind of what the effects anxiety is doing, right, with the clients that I see, right, in my work as a therapist. So long as we are not addressing the fact that we do not have a support system for people's anxiety in this moment, I think it is, and to not discount the necessity to have conversations around, around classes, around Zoom meetings, around disposable items, that those conversations become scapegoated because systemic anxiety is not being addressed. And for me, right, as a mental health worker, as a psychotherapist, it gets back to the fact that we still don't even see mental health as a healthcare issue overall in our country, right? I don't have the exact citations for this, but I remember that when I was in my undergrad program and I took my intro psych class, that our professor told us that, so this would be back in the late 2000s, so 2008 or 2009, that at that moment, so this is about 10 years ago, just under 50% of people would meet the clinical definition of having anxiety. When I graduated with my MSW in 2016, the anecdotal, not quite yet peer-researched and peer-reviewed information said it's probably closer to 2 and 3, right? So we're talking a significant jump in less than 10 years. And in my work, kind of that focuses on systemic anxiety, I have a bit more broad of a definition of anxiety than kind of just a clinical definition. I mean, I would argue that anxiety is the root of the problem for greater than 19 out of 20 of my clients right now. And that's pre coronavirus. That's pre election anxiety. That's pre threats of war, right? These are very kind of interpersonal problems, not even talking systemically, right? That people are bringing anxiety into every part of their daily lives. So when we talk about things like the ongoing injustices to, the disabled community, and kind of the tokens that seem to be thrown around conversations around, disposable versus reusable, utensils and glassware, it fails to take into account also that anxiety is driving the conversation now, right? That if we're going to talk about, if we're going to talk about the moves from anxiety, right, that are driving people to take these extreme drastic steps, and I only use that language extreme and drastic because it's having seismic shifts, right, on the way we are doing and living in the vast majority of the world today, right? Everyone is feeling very upended by these moves. Before we can talk about the injustice and the ways that the disabled community has been ignored in these conversations, we have to address that people's anxieties are through the roof right now, right? That when people are anxious, we're not thinking from our prefrontal cortex. We're not thinking from the logical, rational part of our brain. That anxiety makes us go to the irrational, the catastrophic, the worst case scenario, if you will. And so if we try and engage these conversations, my fear is that the disabled community, again, gets scapegoated. And in particular, the subset of the disabled community, which are people with mental health disabilities, right? That there's I have an individual in my congregation, so this is not one of my clients, so I can speak to this a little bit, who is a person with physical disabilities, who had a really hard time when our congregation was moving towards using reusable dishes and things during coffee hour in our congregation, but also has a very open and ongoing journey with severe obsessive compulsive disorder. So in talking with them this week and checking in, they mentioned like how they feel so torn, right, between these two worlds of, well, if I use disposable things, then people reject me because, oh, it wasn't that important to you to begin with. But I have to do that for my obsessive compulsive disorder. But if I use reusable things, then I'm not being sensitive to the anxieties that are going on, and it hurts me as a disabled person, right? So again, so many complex layers. I know that that's a lot to kind of put out there, but I think it speaks, right, to the complexity that anxiety is not making this clear for us. So yeah, I'll put that back out there, because I know that's a lot right there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I mean, so to be frank, like I had a call this afternoon with my therapist, because their office was like, no one can come into the office. Yep. But she still had a call with me, which I really appreciated. But what was interesting was one of our conversations was around that I had just gotten all of my medication refilled, that my prescription had just been, or my doses had just been recently increased. And I had realized when I took a pause today, that I wasn't experiencing one of my symptoms of my anxiety, are spiral compulsive thinking, where I fixate on something, usually something negative, usually something that seems catastrophic. And I just can't just spiral, cannot let it go. It's just, nonstop. And I was like, I paused it and I realized, oh, I should be doing that right now because the world is like seemingly burning down around us. But I realized that it was the first time I had been asking myself this question over the last month or so of this medication. Is it even working? Is it even working? Because you don't really notice if it is necessarily until you pause and think about how you should be reacting to something and realize you're not having your normal reaction. And that was sort of what it was like for me today. And then I was just thinking, had I not had access to my medication and the comfort of knowing that I have a brand new bottle of it and I'm good for the foreseeable future, how differently my response to what is happening around me would be right now, and how fearful and compulsive my thinking around it would be. I just can't even begin to imagine for those that don't have access to the resources that I have right now, what that must be like. Jameelah, your thoughts?
I can tell you what that like. It's absolutely horrendous, right? So I am between insurances right now, and that means the anxiety medications and things that I take to literally keep my life functioning. I had them in a minute, at least not all in a row. And so when something like this happened, I really had to go back to my journals, literally when I I'm particularly good at channeling the energy of my good days. And I think that's a practical thing we can tell people. Channel the days that you feel good, channel the energy when you feel good. Write the memories in the journal, do the things, all that when the days that you're feeling good. So the days you are feeling bad is kind of like, yay, Pastor Jameelah showed up for herself in that moment. All right, I see you. You know, so like, I had the journals that reminded me that everything was going to be okay and that, you know, the world is not burning down. And I printed out the dog meme of like, everything is fine. And then I was like, no, under it, I wrote like, no, everything really is fine. You know, like all the things that I was learning in therapy, writing all those things down so that now I have this kind of source book because dorky scholar, I have this like kind of source book of like, so when I didn't have medication, when I was finally starting to like function at my full capacity, what are the things that I was doing, thinking, feeling? And now in the last couple of weeks, I dug that journal out and started looking at that. Has that been 100% effective? Absolutely not, come on. But laying in the bed kind of spiraling about what could happen, especially as someone whose immune system hasn't been strong lately. I mean, I've been sick, like in bed for weeks at a time, 3 times in the last 6 months. So as someone whose immune system isn't that strong right now, you really do just sit in the bed and wonder about what happens if you go outside. I was legitimately afraid to go to work today. And so when you don't have the resources, at least not at your direct disposal, and this is also presuming you know you need them, because as people of color, we know the stigma around mental health and therapy and anxiety and all these things. So assuming that you know you need tools to deal with your anxiety, then there's actually accessing them and then knowing that this is a time to put those into place. If any of those things are not in place right now, it really does feel like your chest is caving in sometimes. It does feel like, especially I wanted to speak to something you said, Jonathan, that this was definitely post-election, and I mean, pre-election, pre-coronavirus. What does it mean for somebody sitting with anxiety right now who's been told since 2016 that this would happen?
Exactly.
Election day 2016, we sat in our beds crying, and then we woke up and everyone told us that there was going to be a zombie apocalypse. And I don't think I slept for 2 weeks. And then I wake up 2 days ago and everything is canceled and flights are grounded. And literally the beginnings of all of my dystopian novels that I like to read are playing out in front of me. And everybody told me, don't worry about it. I mean, come on, breathe. Everything's fine. The reality is that these types of things, and here they are happening. And to someone, as someone with anxiety or someone with presenting with these kind of symptoms, I don't use this word lightly. It drives it. You feel like you're going crazy. You really do. So that's what it feels like right now. It feels like you're going crazy, and it feels like everyone who told you that everything was going to be okay is lying. That's what it feels like.
You know, and I want to speak to something, you know, Jameelah, that you had mentioned about the kind of effects on your immune system, right? That when we are chronically anxious, we don't talk often enough, I believe, about the intersection between mental health and physical health in terms of what it actually does, right? I think there's a lot of kind of anecdotal comments about, you know, take care of your body, you take care of your mind, you know, get your 8 hours of sleep and whatnot. But what we actually know is that when people are chronically anxious, that the inflammation that it triggers in the body literally does damage to our body's cells, right? So there's this huge fear that as people continue to live with this chronic anxiety, right, particularly people of color, right, those of us who live with chronic trauma in our bodies, that our immune systems are already depleted and weakened, and we might not even know it, right? We may think, hey, we're doing, as much as we can, but we're already operating from a one-down position when it comes to anxiety in our immune system. Because of the traumas that we're facing, so I think, so I guess I would go back, AnaYelsi, to one of your, kind of the centering questions of, why community care, right? Because when anxiety is depleting our immune systems, and that's compounded with the anxieties we normally feel, right, as people of color, as queer people, as people of different genders and ethnicities, it makes us doubly susceptible, right? So again, and kind of even going back to the question around disability justice and whatnot, the anxieties from that right, also are going to continue to deplete our immune systems. So it's so frustrating because we are already in this one down position.
Right.
And, Jameelah, you saying like it you didn't quite use this word, but it feels almost gaslighting, right? When people are like, oh, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. It's like, well, you already are one level up above us when it comes to our immune systems, when it comes to our stress levels, our anxiety levels.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so for me, community care looks like, so how do we hold each other, right? If we can't go to therapy because it's inaccessible, if we can't go to therapy because we can't find a competent, queer or trans person of color who can do therapy to meet us in our spaces, how do we show up for each other? Because if we can do even one thing to click our anxiety down one notch, that's going to help our inflammation. That's going to help our immune system. And in talking about that intersection in our body, like where those two kind of worlds intersect with each other, I think is really important. And it's an important part of the conversation that we're not just talking about mental health, we are talking about physical health and how much those are connected to one another, that we can't keep siloing these off, right? Like, oh, stay inside, wash your hands, cough into your elbow. Oh, and do your therapy, do your mindfulness, take your medication. No, those things are so inextricably linked. And the sooner we make that connection, that one actually benefits the other just as much as one hurts the other, I think we can see a lot more ways that the community can come together, right? We can say, maybe we're not all trained therapists, but I can show up for you in this physical way, which is going to help your mental health.
Right. So what are some of these physical ways that we can show up for one another? Because we said we want to give people some tangible responses and not just theory. So what, as someone who is a mental health service provider, as someone who's dealt with chronic pain and anxiety, as folks of color, what are the things that we would suggest, the things that we know we need, that we can be doing for the folks in our community during this pandemic when it comes to people who have compromised immune systems, who are dealing with mental health issues that make it harder to deal or respond to to current events, that are physically disabled in ways that make it harder to get out and do what needs to be done to prepare if they are having to self-quarantine or something like that. What are the things that we as members of the community can be doing for those folks, for one another? Some tangible things.
I am taking notes. And two, I believe in my soul that we cannot do anything in isolation.
Absolutely.
I can do something in isolation, but I already know that I cannot do it well or to my full potential. And that includes getting better when I'm sick. And the flip side of that is when you are sick with something like the flu or something like coronavirus or something like a common cold, the first thing that everybody does is they do this. They say, stay away from me. They do this, they do this. They go, well, that's Wakanda forever. But people do like this and they go, hey, stay away from me. I am going to put you in isolation. Now, do we know that's good for containing viruses and bacterial infections? Yes, we do. But do we also know that that's a red flag for depression, consistent isolation? Yes, we do. So how do we deal with the fact that both of those things are happening at the same time? When you tell someone who might be depressed right now, the best thing that you can do is isolate yourself from the world for 14 days. What if you're a person who for mentally that's not feasible for you? It's not feasible for you to stay in your own head isolated or
Sorry, that was me.
Isolated for 14 days. You want to say hi? I'm on Facebook Live. Okay. That was me. That was my sister. What do you do practically for that? Show up for each other online is my biggest thing. And back to your question about things that people now want to do now that it's like something that will keep them physically healthy. I remember a time where digital activism and digital work was not considered real work. When getting on Facebook and gathering support for something, or getting on Twitter and screaming into the void via hashtag was not considered something that we do. And now people are checking the CDC's Twitter page before they even check the news. And that does make me salty and frustrated. And I'm going to sit in that, because the same people who were telling me that digital activism wasn't real and that I needed to get off of the computer and do real work are trying to figure out how to digitally organize because they're going to be isolated. So long story long, practical thing that you can do, get with your people on the internet, Zoom, Google Hangout, whatever the cool kids are using right now to keep in touch with each other, and intentional ways. A lot of people are working from home. TikTok, a lot of people are working from home. What does it look like to say, all right, tomorrow from 9 to 12, I'm going to be on Facebook Live doing work. Anybody want to join me do work? Tell me what you have to get done today, and let me know how you're doing with that. Last night, I said, listen, I can't refresh and see another thing that tells me that the world is crashing down. I am going to watch Cars on Disney Plus, and if you would like to tweet along with me, please do that. Show up for people in that practical way and get creative for how to see people when you have to be under the kinds of quarantines that we're under right now. Show up for each other on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I had suggested or offered and was suggesting that others try and offer as well is, and we have to weigh, and you kind of named this, Jameelah, weighing safety and, practicality against, being open and generous and as offering as much as we can. But for those of us that, like myself, that don't have a compromised immune system, that are relatively young, I like to think, and so aren't as likely to be, to have like the drastic, horrific results of coronavirus that others are, there are ways at which I can be of service to those that may be compromised. Knowing, of course, that I don't want to go out more than necessary, because even though I may not be at risk, if I'm potentially a carrier, others may be at risk. So it's not just about my own well-being, but making sure that I'm not subjecting others to a virus if it's going to harm them and they are compromised. But with that being said, I can, with caution, make runs to the grocery store, pick up prescriptions for folks if they really need it. We made the offer, my husband and I, if we have a couch and we have an air mattress, like, yes, we may need to self-quarantine, but do you need to do it in your own home? Come crash with us for 2 weeks. And so whatever your capacity is to make these offers, now is the time to be making them. Some people are going to have the energy and the ability to outright ask for them because they need them. And the folks who probably need it the most aren't likely to ask, which means being proactive and making the offer. Hey, I know you're in your place alone for the foreseeable future. Do you want to come be with us? Do you need anything? Can I bring you something? How are you doing? Do you want to get on Zoom, or do you want to get on Twitter and do co-watch a movie or whatever it is? It's being proactive and making the offers and just making sure that folks know that the offer is out there in the first place. Those are just some really obvious ways in which we can care for one another, particularly for those that are the most compromised by what's happening right now. Do you have some suggestions, Jonathan?
Yeah. So jumping off of what you had mentioned, Jameelah, right, about we need to do this in community. I know we're not talking too much theory, but I want to validate the kind of the psychology behind that, and add a tool that I use a lot in my practice. It's the tool of acknowledgement, and I'm going to put the link to this video on the Facebook comment section.
Yay.
The tool that I'm using, it's the tool of acknowledgement, and the video is on grief, actually. But the premise of the video is, what do you do when you're sitting with someone who has a problem that is utterly unfixable, right? And I think in this day and age, right, the coronavirus it is utterly unfixable on an individual level, right? That at the end of the day, there's really nothing I can individually do to make this better for you. And it talks about in this video how it's kind of our human nature to tell people to look on the bright side, right? Come up with solutions. And again, it's not malicious. It's done in this attempt to be helpful. And I think particularly those of us in helping professions and kind of helping ministries, healing ministries, we have this sense, right, that if I can't do anything, that it makes us feel powerless, right? And we want to support our community, but sometimes we don't even know how, right? Because we're dealing with our own grief and anxiety. So acknowledgement as a tool is really this idea of saying, what if we just name for people who are anxious that we see your anxiety?
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's valid.
Because what happens is, I think when we rush to solutions too quickly, particularly if they're people we don't know, we don't know their whole story. Again, even the most well-intentioned solutions can come off as really dismissive. And again, not our intention at all. But I think the tool is, how do we, as those who are helpers and healers, sit with that uncomfortableness of saying, there's not a lot I can do, but I can bear witness. I like using that language more in kind of religious settings. I bear witness to the anxiety that you're bringing to this space. And I think particularly for those of us, people of color, LGBTQIA people, who have, kind of been gaslighted around, oh, you're over exaggerating, you're panicking too much, that what we can offer in our communities is to say, we are not alone. Yeah. As a fellow person of color, I see this and it's valid. Can't fix it, but I'm just naming that I see you. I think that's so important, and again, the rush to isolationism, right? Again, that's the physical component, that's the physical health piece, but that's so detrimental to the mental health piece, right? And again, the more we can bridge that gap, right, and say that, okay, maybe if we physically have to quarantine, we have to find ways to not mentally quarantine from one another, right? I see you, I'm gonna show up for you, I'm gonna be present for you. That I think is the most important thing. It's my gravest concern as a therapist right now, knowing how many of my clients who may be asked to self-quarantine, that will be so detrimental for them. Clients that I've worked with for months, working on obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, who are regressing so hard right now. And they know that if they try and do all the things we've worked on, right, for months, call up a friend, go out to lunch, go, small goals, and now they can't do it. Not only does it set them back, symptomatically, they also feel like they failed, right? They feel like, oh, all that work I put in was for nothing. So the more we show up and just acknowledge that this is hard for all of us, again, it might not seem like a lot, but I think it's one of the most important things we do. Show up, bear witness, acknowledge. Don't have to fix, but to be present in that way.
Yeah, I really do. I agree with what you're saying a lot. I think that another churchy word is ministry. And I think that presence is a ministry. Like, just we as people have those moments where we don't want to be around people, but we don't want to be by ourselves either. Yes. And so then what does that mean? And I mean, I've had friends who will literally just come and sit on the couch and do nothing, and I will putter around them. But it's just something, I think that there's something about the witness and like the presence that's a ministry. And people think that they have to have something tangible or financial to give, or they think they're not helping at all. And I think that's now if you have that to give, that's great. to switch lanes a little bit. I think it's so important to assess what you can do. because this idea that, because you might also be seeing on Facebook, like, or Instagram or wherever, that like, this is proving that capitalism doesn't work. And this is proving that, yeah, lots of things prove that capitalism doesn't work. But I think we focus so much on, The Lion King is my favorite movie, and we focus so much on Scar that we don't see what the hyenas are doing. And we focus so much on like big villains that we don't see what the hyenas are doing, you know? And I think that a lot of this fear mongering and this anxiety inducing thing that makes us self-isolate and makes us go and buy and hoard toilet paper and wipes and these things, I think that that's a way that the little hyenas, you know, maybe not Jeff Bezos, but somebody who owns a bunch of Walmarts around the corner is trying to keep us very individualistic. And one of the ways that shows up is, if I had more, then I would give more. If I had more, then I would do more. We know from studying, they call it altruism, like what makes you go in your pocket and give to the Salvation Army guy or whatever it is you do. What makes someone do that? And it's not because I had a bunch of, and so I gave. I had $1,000, so I gave $1. So this idea that if you had more to give, you would start giving is not a thing. And so, but the first step really is to assess, what do you have? I do a lot of dropping PayPal links and GoFundMe's on my pages. And I want to ask people, have you assessed how much you have to give before you tell me that you can't do anything? Have you looked at the spreadsheet, the balance sheet, whatever? Is there actually nothing left? And that's not just financially. I'm talking about time. I'm talking about rolls of toilet paper. Is there actually nothing left? Or are you invested in the idea that you need more so that one day you can start giving what you have? And I think the first step is to assess everything from your time, your energy. I love a good list. I mean, write down all the things you think you have to give. And if you're literally like, okay, I have an hour, then call up a friend and say, I got an hour. What you need me to do? Right? I got $5. What you need me to do? It becomes a much more intentional way to help people in the way that we need help right now. It becomes, for me, a much more intentional way to show up for a community. So that's a practical thing that people can do too, as far as like how to show up for a community. Assess the ways that you actually have on paper, because write the vision and all that stuff. What ways do you actually have the capacity to do that? And then it prevents a lot of burnout on both ends, on everybody's end.
So you know, and some of the things we're hearing are, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan. I was gonna say, some of the things we're hearing are to be present, to bear witness, to assess what you have, not just monetarily, but to assess all the different ways in which you might be able to be of service or give. And I think, Jameelah, what you're touching on is, so I led a retreat in Canada a couple weeks ago, or a week ago, I've lost all sense of time, on decolonization. And the phrase that I kept using and talking about was a spirit of abundance. So we talked a lot about what a spirit of abundance looks like, which sounds so like, you know, airy, whatever, you know, amorphous, oh, spirit of abundance. But what we're talking about is the idea that we have everything we need. It's just a matter of accurately assessing it and holding it out with an open hand, being willing to let go of things, and letting go of the idea that there's so much scarcity that I have to get mine, do for me before I can do for you. So essentially it's the opposite of the airplane thing. Like, don't necessarily need to put your mask on before you put everyone else's on. Like, it's together. How do we make sure we're all like getting what we need at the same time? And so some of the things that we can do is not just assessing what you have, but also being careful as we begin to hoard. Like, we're beginning to get things and feel this need to hoard, to grab as much as possible. One of the things you're hearing a lot from disability activists right now is when we do that, when we hoard all of the hand sanitizer, when we hoard all of the masks, which that's a whole other conversation about whether that's even what you need to be doing. But when we hoard all of these items, that impact the quality of life for folks dealing with compromised immune systems on a daily basis, regardless of coronavirus, we're not taking care of our community. And so I saw something as simple today. I had a friend on Facebook who wrote, hey, a Facebook status, I have a gallon jug of hand sanitizer. If your things empty out, you can come on over and refill it from me. Such a simple offer. But that was an act of community care. Like, hey, here's a resource I have it in abundance. Come and get what you need. So don't take more than you need in the first place. Really try and believe in that spirit of abundance. But then also, if you realize that you have a plethora of something, if you have so much, then begin to think of ways in which you can let go of it, give it to those that need it more, or without none at the moment. We're going to move on to the next topic in a moment, but I want Jonathan to be able to say what you were going to share.
Yeah, just really briefly to the hoarding piece, I think it's a complexity, and I'm not sure how to deal with it yet. The fact that, operating from a place of scarcity is in itself an anxious response.
Sure.
Right. That clients who are hoarders, right, that this is a really, really hard time for them right now. And even being sensitive, right, in the ways we talk about hoarding, right, and the shame that is associated around it. And it's not a criticism, it's a complexity, right? Because the type of hoarding that we're seeing, and Jameelah, I think you hit it really, nail on the head. Who is generating this culture of scarcity, right? Who is benefiting from the fact that we are all running out buying 42 years worth of toilet paper, right? Who is that benefiting, and who are the ones that are driving the anxiety? And it breaks my heart because people who are working so hard to overcome their own impulses to hoard just on a quote unquote regular normal basis because of their anxiety or their trauma or whatever. Again, it's the regression that is just literally killing some people because there's so much shame around it, right? That suddenly hoarding is cool, right? It's what all the millennials are doing, buying everything, and we're all bragging about how we got the last container of wipes. Meanwhile, this is crushing because some of my clients are going to go back when this is all over, and if anything, are going to hoard twice as much. Going to face even more isolation from their families because of the shame and whatnot around it. I don't have a solution. I don't even know if there is a solution to that, but it's just one more there where I'm like, dear God, who else is being left behind in this discussion? And how do we even begin to think about what healing, in that sense, will look like community healing down the road? So just one more layer, I think, that has no easy solution, if at all, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So that moves us to this next part of our conversation, which I think I know impacts each of us personally, which is this idea of what does this mean economically? What does this mean financially, particularly for those that are working in a gig economy, for those that are in the service industry? I had mentioned earlier off camera that it's not even just really the only people who are safe are not even those that are salaried, but those that are salaried and in an industry that is not impacted by like public consumption. So that's a very small number of folks. Most of us in varying degrees of intensity are impacted. Our wallets are impacted. Our income is impacted, which means our ability to survive and care for ourselves and our loved ones is impacted. So I thought maybe if you're willing, as much as you're able, to share maybe how this personally does impact you, how you can speak to it on a personal level. But then I wanted us to get into what are ways that we can support those that are impacted by a loss of money as a direct result of restaurants closing, gigs being canceled, schools shifting how they're doing their work, whatever it may be. Does someone want to share first? I can go ahead.
I can go because I just presented on this in our meeting the other day. So from a clinical therapist perspective, the biggest anxiety, and something that I think a lot of people are not aware of, is the mental health profession. I guess you could call it as a white collar gig economy, in the sense that our income is based on insurance reimbursements and private pay rates, which means if I am not seeing clients, there is no, you don't invest in a therapy practice. It's not a product I can sell at the store and make a profit off of. It literally requires you sitting in front of me, either in person or digitally, but that's a whole other thing. Telehealth and counseling is lots of difficulties behind that. So my concerns are twofold, right? So number one, if my clients who are anxious, rightly so, don't feel comfortable showing up, I am not able to continue to practice, right? I will have to find another job. I might have to move home. I might have to move away from where I am, which then ultimately hurts my clients, right? Who need the counseling services that I offer.
Yeah.
So that's the first concern. The second concern, and I think this is the longer term issue we're going to see, is as my clients face layoffs, as they face losing their jobs, as they lose the ability to pay for their health insurance, right? They won't be able to come to session as well. The difficult thing, you know, one of the conversations that is often brought up is, why is therapy so expensive? It's precisely because of the fact that we have no paid sick time. We have no sick time at all, right? If I'm sick and I cancel on a client, depending on how reactive that client is, they may never come back. I may lose what I thought was going to be an income source from that client and have counted on for the next 6 months, but because I had to cancel, I have to redo all my calculations. I lose that. If I am not able to meet my caseload that I'm required to meet to pay rent, right? So that already comes out of every client fee that I bill. But if I don't make enough, I have to dip into my own savings and pay that back. It's something that I think a lot of people are not aware of, just how fragile the mental health system is, how overworked, how overburdened we are. Yeah, there's some community mental health centers, but funding for those are drying up. In the kind of area in upstate New York where I live, we've had 2 community mental health centers, you know, where people on Medicaid can go and get services. We don't accept Medicaid here, because for us to take it would literally mean we are making less per hour than it costs me to pay in my rent, my liability insurance, and everything, because we get no government funding, unlike those community mental health centers. There will be such a huge gap in services, right? If I'm quarantined, right? So telehealth, what I was going to say is telehealth only reimburses anywhere from 1/5 to 1/3 of our current rates. So I would need to see 3 times as many clients. If insurance even allows me, there's some health insurance plans that just don't accept telehealth at all, right? So if I'm quarantined and I'm sick, I would have to somehow come up with 3 times the caseload to continue to meet my billing requirements. That is also contingent on the fact that my clients are appropriate for telehealth. Some of my clients too volatile. I need to see them in person for their own safety, right? If I'm working with a couple, for instance, that's really reactive, I need to be in the room with them because I might literally need to slow them down, separate them. That's too volatile to do on a telehealth platform. And then what happens if they become quarantined, right? Or if one of my clients gets sick and then our whole office has to shut down, right? So we have 15 other therapists in this office. If one person gets sick, it's not just me who goes down, it's all of my clients, all the other therapists, all their clients. It is so fragile. And then I'm expected to sit here and be a calm, non-anxious presence to my clients, right? While every time they cough, I'm like, bring them down with Lysol in the session, you know, it's not me, it's you. But I think important to name that reality of how fragile mental health systems are all around the country right now, and the things that we need most. And again, this goes back to community care. If I have to, right, I'm going to have to shift to doing non-therapeutic coaching, but then people have to pay me out of pocket for that, right? Just again, so I can maintain my status on insurance panels and licensing and whatnot. There's no solution for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, oh God. I've had folks I know who are teachers, who are, I know someone, I was telling Jameelah, who's a rapper who just had to cancel their West Coast tour because of this. I know folks who are like public educators, so they do workshops and speaking engagements and all. I'm one of those people who's already had engagements be canceled, and I'm certain that in the next week I have 2 others that are about to be canceled, that are my only source of income. But for those in particular who, like you mentioned, how it impacts not just you, Jonathan, but it impacts your clients, and it's this cyclical, like, that can't be stopped. That's how it is. Take for instance the person who had their tour canceled. It's not just them; it's everyone that was going to work that tour. Right. It's their crew, it's their band. It's like this impacts so many people. Service industries, the idea, for restaurants, for example, it's not just like if that restaurant gets closed, it's the bus boy in the back, it's the servers, it's hostesses, like all these people who are out of work, who absolutely are paycheck to paycheck, if that. There's no in the reserves, live off of if you have to, find something else for a month or whatever. It's just not an option.
Right.
And so there's so many of us who are already feeling the financial burden of things being canceled, of things closing down, of folks like self-quarantining themselves. And I only see that getting worse and getting more difficult. Jameelah, how has it impacted you? Or how do you anticipate it impacting you?
I am a graduate teaching assistant. I have $8.21 in my bank account, and I have quite a few overdue bills. And this was pre-coronavirus. That's what has been happening. The state of Georgia has just pretty much closed all of the school systems. I mean, every school, so Atlanta's here, every school system around here has been shut down. So we're talking about everyone who works in an average American small town. The medical industry and the education industry are what drives the economy in smaller towns. It's not the mining, y'all. It's not the coal miners no more, right? Yep. Most people in small towns, they either work for the city in some type of medical capacity, they're nurses or EMTs, or they work for the school system in some capacity. So when school shuts down, we're talking about entire towns that will be essentially non-functioning, As far as me, I have students that can't go home because they're told to move out of their dorms by tomorrow at 5, but they can't afford a plane ticket, a train ticket, a bus ticket. And a lot of the things that I used to do with a salary job that I had this time last year was I did the thing that teachers and educators do. I reached into my drawer and said, don't tell nobody I gave you this, and handed them a Greyhound ticket. So it makes me feel pretty helpless in the ways that I'm able to help other people. In the ways that impacts myself, I don't know yet. I was just told today that I can't come back to campus for 2 weeks. I am salaried in that I get a GTA check once a month, but I don't know what happens to that check now. I really have no idea. If the school is shut down, will my check be late? I have no idea. Am I considered a work-study employee, which we have so many students in the college system who, they work at the bookstore, they work in the caf. All of those are work-study jobs that are funded by the state and sometimes the federal government. And so students don't know if they're getting work-study checks. The most that we can assume is that these will become like a furlough type situation where you go to work and you maybe get paid later. So, I mean, as far as what's happening now, I can assume I have an April check. I don't know what happens after that. And I don't know what the redress is going to be. I don't know about lost wages. I don't know about, because, you know, the elementary K-12 can't do distance learning. I don't know what's going to happen about lost education for them. I don't know what that's going to look like. I still have to teach online, but, you know, Scar said, be prepared, and prepared we shall be. So I done uploaded my things. I've uploaded as many things as I can to the learning platform, but I'm already having students email me about not having adequate internet or laptop access to do that. So lots of things are happening right now as far as that, how that impacts me personally.
Yeah, and I think this is where we see that intersection of things where it's not like for students, it's not just a matter of, oh, classes are online now. Well, are you are you financially in a place where you have the technology to get online, that you have the internet service to get online? The question of, you know, in terms of disability, is viewing, listening to something online, watching, if there's, you know, if there's video, if there's images, like, are there image descriptions or captions, all these different things, where what is your ability to actually access and utilize these online resources?
Right. Do you even know how to do it? Right. I mean, most instructors avoid our college, like, you know, we avoid all kinds of things that we could be doing to make stuff more equitable. So, so we're learning how to use our college just like our students. And then if students wanted to go to school online, they wouldn't be in class with me. So it's like, now I got to do parallel lessons. It's like, I got to teach you the, you know, rhetoric and composition. And also, hey, here's a bonus lesson on how to organize yourself when your class is on the computer or when your class is on your phone. Like, here's some resources to help you do that, because you didn't sign up, you didn't pay tuition to take an online class, but here we are.
Yep.
So speaking again of this question of how do we move from theory or ethics around being just and providing community care to the actual practice of being just and providing community care, what are some of the things we can do for folks who are paycheck to paycheck, who are working in the service industry, who are dependent on the gig economy? What are things that we can be doing in the meantime if we are in a more secure place and can somehow assist them?
Oh, gig economy, that's like Uber, y'all. Somebody always asks me what like gig economy is. It's like stuff you need a gig for. So, you know, you used to being at a bar and somebody say, oh, I got a music gig, and, you know, put the guitar on his back and it's like, I got a gig. But the gigs are how that person pays their bills. So gig economy is anything that you would need clients for, that you would need, I'm trying to say that you would need people to pay you for, but that's like everything. So
overwhelmingly is some sort of face-to-face.
Yep.
So if you do hair, if you a barber, if you do hair, if you do the most hard-hitting one right now is like Uber and Lyft. That's gig economy. Stuff where you work off of tips, stuff like that. So what do those people do?
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, to be blunt, if you got money, if you got some money burning a hole in your pocket and you know you're going to be okay for the, you know, foreseeable future. You know, Jameelah mentioned how she often will post folks like Cash App or Venmo and stuff like that on her timeline. You should be the folks responding to those sort of posts, who are reaching out to folks who know, salud, are in the gig economy, and ask, and like slide them that 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever it is you have the capacity to slide them, with no expectation of necessarily something in return, but just knowing that like that might be what gets them a little bit of food for that week because they have no gigs for the foreseeable future. Or, I mean, this feels a little self-serving, but it's a good example, so I'm going to name it. One of the only things that I offer that doesn't require being in person is the coaching that I do. So I've told people like, hey, if I can't do my public events, utilizing my coaching services is one of the only way I can, you know, pay for things right now. So figure out what services the folks that you know, what they offer that doesn't require you being in the same room as them, and utilize those services.
Yep.
I saw something earlier that was an amazing suggestion that was like, if you have a restaurant you love, but you don't necessarily want to go to the restaurant right now, buy a gift certificate online so that they have money coming in and use that gift certificate later. You know, don't just tip the 20%, which you should be tipping anyway, to folks like Uber and all of that. Tip a little bit more, knowing that they're going to be getting less folks than they normally do. What are some other ways, if any?
Resident broke kid checking in. All right. Which is, I think, to circle back around to the hoarding conversation, that's actually something that I worked out through, like, healing from all of the mental anxiety that comes from growing up with not a lot of money. I wouldn't use the word poor, but we paid all our bills, but nothing else nothing else could happen, you know, and sometimes, because life, other things happened. You can be a month behind in something before you get a late bill, right? A lot of the times people will let you get, and so if you're due for what this month, March, if you're due for March, usually you can get to the next month before you start accruing late charges and all those things, right? So on your bill, it's going to say your due date. And then sometimes on your utility bill or something, it's going to say pay by, right? It's going to give you another date, and it's usually the next month because they're billing you for the month before. Okay, so I'm not paying for March's water, I'm paying for February's water. And sometimes people bill 2 months prior. So for some utility bills, it's March and I'm paying for January's water. So always understand what your bill can do and how you can finagle that money. A lot of utility companies have what's called intent to pay, which is I'm gonna send you $15, and that gives me I'm trying to pay something, right? Most people will give you 60 to 90 days before you start cutting stuff off, right? So how to finesse them bills. If you have to, call and ask for an extension. Some utility companies are starting to give longer extensions. Look to see if mayor of Atlanta has just signed an executive order to stop water shutoff so that people can keep washing their hands. Look to see if something like that is going on. Call and always see if you can ask for an extension, okay? Finagle that money. If you have $50, send $10 to 5 people and say, this is what's going on and this is why I'm doing that. Always talk to a person rather than doing something over your phone or calling and talk to a person. If you need me to call the people, I will call the people, because anxiety over making a phone call. Make the phone call and say, this is my situation. What can we do? And as long as you're not like 24 hours from a cutoff date, there's usually something that people can do. There's payment plans, there's payment deferments, all kinds of stuff like that. If you really want to go for extra credit and you want to be creative and radical, and you know your landlord or you know whoever you're paying rent to, tell that person that you need a little extra time to pay your rent. Tell them that your friends cannot pay their rent. My rent is, in a perfect world, nothing, but in a less perfect world, $500. Let's just say that it's $500. Can I give you $250 so I can make sure my friend eats with the other half? That's a very valid question to ask right now. These are some of the things that we're gonna have to do because we're in a situation that we haven't been in before. So financially, in addition to seeing what you can give and giving that, those are some things that you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to speak to the medical
get through this
bill component, right, as somebody who works with medical bills. So one thing that people are often, if you have a copay on your insurance, unfortunately a lot of people have high deductible plans, but sometimes if you meet your deductible, you have a copay, or maybe you have a plan through work where you have a copay. If you have some, and typically this works better with therapists, somebody you're seeing all the time, but I've had doctors' offices do this as well. If you are really in a hardship, you can ask your provider to write the insurance company what is called a letter of hardship and submit it on your behalf to the insurance company, which says, I as the provider I'm just going to write off the copay. And for my fellow therapists who might be listening, who are worried about, where their income is coming, you can write that off as a business loss. Check that in your own state, but you can usually write that off as a business loss. That means that your doctor's office, your therapist, your provider only gets the portion that comes in from the insurance company, not your copay. So essentially, they're waiving your copay for you, but they're doing it in such a way, because here's what happens. Sometimes the doctor's offices will waive your copay and they'll say, it's fine. But if that's not documented, the insurance company legally can come after you later and send you to collection if the doctor's office did not submit the proper paperwork. But if you ask for that and work with your provider, that is something that they can have documented. That saves some of my clients, $150, $200 a month just in their copay fees. So I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people don't know.
And what's that called again?
That it is often available. Sorry, say that again.
What's that called again for folks?
Oh, a letter of hardship. Yeah.
Thank you.
Write that hardship letter. Listen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I was just thinking, we're talking about what are creative ways that we can be of service to one another. And I'm thinking how I don't really have much in the way of money, but you're talking about calling folks and having to finagle things, and that is my gifting. I had a conversation because I do come from living most of my life poor, at around poverty lines, all that good stuff. And so I've had to hustle. I know what it is to hustle and move money around, the small little bits you have to try and get through the next month. And I had this conversation with my husband recently because he'll get on a call usually and be like, oh, okay, yes or no, we have it. And whereas I'll get on and I'll be like, okay, we're gonna have a conversation about this. You're gonna get what you're gonna get. You're gonna get what I have, and that's it. I can't make money exist that doesn't exist.
I don't have it.
Right.
I don't have it, Caller.
But I have no qualms about doing that. I have no problem being that person. That's something I can offer.
I don't have it.
Yep.
I don't have it.
I can offer that to people.
One other thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Find you something you can cook for $12. Okay. Find you one inexpensive thing that you like. My thing is pens. Okay. Find you one inexpensive thing that you like to have. Okay. So when you are having a bad day, when you just can't get the shit together, go spend you 50 cents on a pen. That find you some inexpensive thing that you like, that you can start to
joy.
that you can find joy in. Find you something real good that you can cook for $12. I used to say 10, but it's really 12 because 10 in tax and capitalism gets you $12. You could be broke, but don't eat like you broke, because that's going to make you start to feel bad. There's no other way I can say that.
Yeah.
Seasoning. We can make anything taste good.
And I think that goes back again to the whole connecting physical and mental health, right? There's so much shame, millennials who get blasted because we like avocado toast and we pay for streaming services and we get the drive-through coffee occasionally. The thing is, in this era of despair, right? That, $8.99 streaming service a month subscription, what that does for your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of, again, how it lifts your spirits, how it can truly, I don't want to I don't want to either. If you have that thing to look forward to, if it gives you hope, again, it helps your immune system. It can lower your anxiety. Again, we're talking, maybe 1 or 2 degrees at a time, but it's something, right? That is, again, because our mental health is just as important and just as connected as our physical health. So, it's okay. If you've had a really, 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 really awful day, if you need to spend, your last couple of bucks and go get that latte through the drive-through, if that's what you need to do.
Without shame.
Right. Exactly. And again, maybe go back to the community care piece. I think sometimes, particularly, in social justice circles, sometimes I think there's this you know, I don't want to say a race to the bottom of who's doing the most, or, you know, conversely, who's doing the least. Let's not do that, right? If somebody needs to do something that doesn't make sense to you, then maybe that's your invitation into their story, if they're willing to let you in, and to understand, you know, that seems like it's really important to you. You know, tell me, share that joy with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since that math don't math, y'all. Okay.
Right.
I'm good at words and I'm good at numbers sometimes. If a latte is $5 and everyone tells you do not buy a latte and that will help you get out of your $2,000 credit card debt, that is 400 lattes. If you have one latte a day, you would have to deny yourself a latte every single day for a year and a half in order for that to be enough to pay off your $2,000 credit card bill, not including the interest, not including the math doesn't math. Buy the pen, buy the avocado, it's fine.
Yep.
I want to go ahead and shift us to our last part of the evening, because I want to respect everybody's time, but I think it's really important that we touch on this last part, which is the question of racism and xenophobia in light of coronavirus and rising tensions and fears. So, you know, I mentioned at the top of this conversation that we have seen attacks on folks who are Asian American, not necessarily even Chinese, just you're Asian. There you go. Much like all Latinx people are Mexican. So I'm a Mexican that was born in Venezuela. So the physical and verbal attacks, racially motivated attacks, the intense loss of business for Asian-owned businesses, some who have had to shut or close their doors as a result. I'm sure there's some things that I'm not naming right now. But I wanted to get your thoughts. One, I think I want to name the ways, like tangibly name the ways in which, or clearly name the ways in which the AAPI community is being impacted because of xenophobia and racism right now. And then I also want to name the ways in which we can stand in solidarity, allies, accomplices, whatever language is comfortable for you. And talk about some like very real, small and big ways in which we can try and stem the impact that we're seeing right now against that community. Jonathan, I'd like to invite you to go ahead and respond first.
Yeah, so I think when this first started, you know, and kind of got into the public sphere, we talk often, I think, in social media, in social justice spaces about the role of humor to cope. So I actually remember I had posted something on social media a couple of weeks ago about being on a train, and this person was being very, very racist with the conversation that she was having. And I walked by and I like cleared my throat as I was walking by, and I kind of laughed at like her response. The humor for that of me is so long past, because I now know that if I do that, I could be killed, right? The hardest part for me in this is as a systems therapist who specializes in systemic anxiety, I also get why that woman on that train might have that reaction. And that's what kills me, because I recognize that my very existence, yes, racism, but even on a deeper level, is triggering a primal systemic fear response, right? In that person. Is it logical or is it rational? No. But again, anxiety shifts us to those places of irrationality. And it's this very strange limbo that I am in, where I both recognize I'm being targeted. So I canceled a trip that I had to make down to New York City this weekend. So I'm both aware of that reality, and I don't even know if it's empathy, but holding acknowledgement as to why people are having this reaction, because literally none of us have seen it to this degree before, right? We are so far off the roadmap at this point. Which again, then that triggers my own anxiety because I don't know the degree of response. And I think it's hard, and I obviously can't speak for, all AAPI people. What I'm trying to hold for my own humanity, right? For my own humanity, is to see the people who are having these anxious reactions, these racist reactions, as people who are being carried away by anxiety that is being perpetuated by a white, capitalist, heteronormative, classist system, right? That person on the train who had that reaction, she is just as much a victim of believing into the system of systemic anxiety. And I might bear the brunt of it, and that's awful. And if something were to happen to me, right, that doesn't put her off the hook. But it does, it helps keep me from losing faith in humanity, right? And to acknowledge that all human beings have these predictable responses to anxiety, right? Again, it's not trying to minimize the unique targeting, of AAPI people in this day and age, or the targeting of Latinx people or Black people, right? But to say, I can't lose my humanity by letting myself see every white person as wanting me to die, right? I cannot allow my mind to go there. And I'm not going to let the system of oppression let me see my siblings that way. I'm not, like, that's my resistance, right? Is to say, I'm naming what this system has done to corrupt and twist and to transform the ways, through anxiety, the ways that people like me are seen in the system. But that's hard. That's taken me a lot of therapy myself, and totally acknowledge that's not where many people are at, but it's what I'm doing to try and hold on to myself in this day and age.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming that, because to be frank, like I'm not there. That it's hard for me even to, like, while I appreciate and I would hope to get to that point, where you are, I know that I'm not there, because my inclination is to say, like, I don't become racist, I don't become transphobic or homophobic when I get more anxious, or when I get scared, or when, whatever, like something, when an emotion is heightened, I don't suddenly develop racist or whatever tendencies. So my inclination is to say, well, then why? And I'm not saying you're saying this, but like my feeling is like, therefore, I'm not willing to excuse or explain or rationalize why someone else would. I was like, you were racist to begin with. Now you just feel like you have license to be free about it, or that you can't temper it because of your fear. But the racism existed either way. And that's kind of the place that I'm in. I'm not even sure that that's necessarily wrong, but either way, I want to get to a place where I can have a more healthy approach, sort of like you're having right now, because I don't know that I'm quite there yet. And it's like you mentioned, for being Latinx, like I think people have this reaction to us, but in a different way, us being Latinx folks, of particularly those who look like me, who they read as Latinx, because they think we're all brown. Side note, we're not all brown. But the folks who are like, we are the picture of what they fear, loss of jobs, loss of land, loss of resources, like threatening to your women, like all the different things. That doesn't, like, to me, I'm like, you're either racist or you're not. Your fear isn't the motivating factor. It's the thing that gives you a license. It's kind of where I am. So, but I still realize I have responsibility for how I react. Working on that part. Jameelah, your thoughts?
Hi, everyone. I like talking about the context of things. And so I'm happy that we got to this part. Y'all, the white supremacist ideal that people who are not white are dirty is not something we should be investing in right now. Because that is what that is, okay? If you are under the sound of my voice, that is what that is. That is the white supremacist racist idea that people who are not white are physically, not just spiritually need to be cleansed, but like literally physically dirty, right? I can list the documents, I'm gonna screenshot them in, you know, in the books that are supposed to be open access anyway. I mean, you can watch conquerors, explorers, whatever, you can literally read their notes and read their letters that they're writing home, talking about how dirty these other people are they're encountering. And that is what is driving all of the stuff we are seeing towards Asian people and the coronavirus, right? Like that is what that is. That's at least the racist idea behind that. And that's not something we should be investing in at all. So just that little part right there, I just need us to hold, okay? I need us to hold that. And of course, I'm talking to people that are like on live and they're gonna watch this later. It's like that is where that comes from. That's where that comes from. That is the conquest 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue idea that people who are not white are literally physically dirty, and that our skin is darker and not pale white because it is naturally dirtier. And then people imagine China and other large cities to be largely urban areas. And then we get into the racism and the anti-Blackness of like urban areas and cities being more dangerous because there are more people of color there, right? So people don't just see New York as dirty because they see it dirty on TV, right? People see New York as dirty because that's where the Black and the brown people live. Like that's also what that is. And so we cannot invest in this idea that people who are white are dirty. We can't have that conversation. And I'm just gonna, can you just come here, my fellow Black people. Don't do this. We can't have this, okay? We can't have this. Everybody else is gonna talk along and good about, you know, the generalization of this, but I want to talk to people who look like me, okay? This thing that people are doing where we're looking at anyone who looks Asian or of Asian descent funny, and then like walking across the street from them and denying their Uber rides and all of these things. How is that different than when people walk by us on the street and clutch their purse and roll their windows up?
Yes.
I have said this before in conversations about the intersection of Black and queer identity, and I'm gonna say it again right here. The pain is not different just because it comes from you, okay? I don't have many boundaries, and I'm working on that. But a clear one that I have is this thing that we do where I am going to do something hurtful, but I'm going through stuff, so it's fine. I can't fuck with that, y'all. I can't fuck with that. And we cannot be, and I'm going to hold and also name the contention between the Black and the AAPI community. Right? Okay. I go to in the city and I go to the supply store and convenience stores just like everybody else. Okay. And we have these contentions that need to be named, but none of that justifies what's going on right now. Because how is that different than what is happening to us? And another white supremacist idea is that it's different. Oh, it's different. Oh, it's okay this time because China is this way. Oh, and it's okay with African Americans because we can say these things because don't you know they do this? All of these things are what happens when we are not in community with each other. Okay? Because when you're not in community with each other, you get to assume things about certain groups of people that don't look like you because you're not in community with them. Right? So to be very specific about people who look like me, talk like me, pray like me, dress like me, we can't have that. I don't care what Becky Mamas let her do. Okay. We can't have that. We cannot perpetuate this systemic oppression and stereotyping against the Asian American community. We can't have it. Yes. And that's all I'm gonna say about that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you touching on that because that was what I was wanting to name was, I mean, there's a specific history between Black and Asian communities, but in folks of color conversation in general, there's because of some very real issues, because of anti-Blackness, because of model minority myth and all these different things. We have been pitted together against one another in very real ways, all to the betterment of whiteness and white supremacy, and to the harm of us, which is very important. Like, even when it has nothing to do with white people, it's to whiteness and the system's benefit that we be at one another's throat, and sometimes at one another's throat for very real reasons. So I just want to reiterate that our fear, that our histories as communities of color and our relationship to one another, none of it excuses not only being violent verbally or physically to the AAPI community right now, but being silent bystanders. There's no excuse for it. So yeah, I think that's absolutely, like, we can't say that enough. It doesn't serve any of us to be doing that. Jonathan, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to expand a little bit, because both you and Jameelah had mentioned, the systemic aspects of racism, and I was talking, kind of about this individual, which again, right, I think there's a misunderstanding oftentimes, right, between people when they talk about racism as, oh, somebody said something mean to me. Individual it's where you get the idea of reverse racism and everything, versus the systemic issue. I hear what you are saying, and I think the difficulty, though, particularly in this time, in this specific case, right, where systemic anxiety as a whole, it's at levels we have never seen before. That it is so hard, right? Systems resist change, right? And when we are anxious, it is the natural tendency to swing back to homeostasis, right? Take me back to what is familiar. I've actually talked before about why the president's slogan, "Make America Great Again," actually is a brilliant statement from a psychological perspective, right? It brings people back to homeostasis. So president raised a bunch of fear, brings people back. Remember when things were better? Remember when you didn't feel this way, right? So yes, the systemic piece of racism, not even piece, the systemic nature of racism, right, is real. But on the one-to-one relationships, right, that I'm having in a therapeutic session, right, the one-to-one conversations I'm having with, white people in my community, in my church, I have found personally that you do have to engage at this very individualistic level, because anxiety has prevented, it's literally frozen their brains from thinking systemically, right? So I can talk all about, right, how, I think Jameelah, as you so appropriately named, right, this goes back to 1492, right? But for the person who's so hijacked with anxiety because it's literally, they believe they might die because of the misinformation about the coronavirus.
Nothing's not going to help.
well, it's not that it's not going to help. It's that literally that part of their brain can't access that information, right? So they're locked in amygdala hijack. Any sort of conversation around systemic racism kind of flies out the window at that point. It's why I think and this is probably a more complex conversation, but it's why I think even white racial justice allies who have done this work for a long time, in high pressure and high degrees of anxiety, sometimes slip. It's not that they are inherently evil people. It's that anxiety shifts them back into that reactive mode so quickly, which stored in the reactive part of their brain is, oh, this person looks like a threat, right? What put that there, right? That's the systemic piece. But in that moment, I've got to work with, how do I just get you out of amygdala hijack and get you back to thinking logically and rationally? You're right. I might personally, right, as this in the therapeutic setting, right, I may have to, slow you down a little bit and, pay a little bit of lip service to the things you're saying, if only to get you back thinking rationally, to get you curious. Why did you have that reaction? What's going on there? That's actually been one of the hardest things about me as I've transitioned from being a minister to being a therapist, is sitting with people who hold repugnant beliefs, right? like deeply offensive to my very being. And I have to sit there and say, you know, that's interesting. You know, tell me more about that. Because I know that if I go in combative, I shut down any attempt to shift their thinking. And I also recognize that's a privilege, right? In the therapy setting, I'm the expert, right? I hold power in the room in that space. And I get that that's not something you can do with somebody who's hurling insults at you on the street corner, and maybe coming after you. Right, that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, I think even for you know, for somebody like me, right, a queer person of color, but who also has other privileges, right, sitting in a therapy office, that is also my obligation to show up and do some of that reframing for my clients if I have the capacity to do so. And definitely for people who identify themselves as allies need to be doing that work as well, right? It doesn't do any good if you cancel your racist Uncle Ralph at the Thanksgiving table. You actually have to go in and tap in and get him out of that amygdala hijack, right? Get him out of that framework that tells him to hate people, right? Because hate is also an anxious response. Something's told you to literally obliterate this person or this identity. If you're going to show up as an ally, you better be doing that work, right? You better be engaging in that process, and that's so hard. And that's what I was referring to, kind of trying to see these people individually on a one-to-one level. And again, for my own humanity, right? To not let myself get swept away, right? Because then that means I can't serve my clients well either, right? Because a lot of my clients are people who hold beliefs that are very different than mine.
And you're right. I mean, there's I just would oppression is a hell of a drug. I just had this conversation with heterosexual folks who are Black, and trying to get them to see. And I think all of us as activists, as community workers, we have this moment where we go, what the hell am I doing? Like, what the hell am I doing sitting next to this homophobic person saying, okay, but why do you feel this way? And these are the things. And it's like, systemic. What is that if not a bunch of individual people doing individual things, and none of them think that the individual things contribute to the whole in any way? None of them think that their homophobic joke is contributing to the large systemic homophobia that we see, right? Any of the jokes and the memes that we're seeing about Asian folks right now, nobody's sharing those things thinking I am contributing to a larger idea called racism. If you ask those people, like, I'm gonna let the joke slide, it's fine, right? But not really. Individual, what is a system but a bunch of individual things? And so a lot of the times we say, okay, well, individually, I do need, like, I do feel a need, especially if you have that type of calling on your life. Not everybody has that calling, okay?
Yeah.
I have the calling, and I've run from it in a lot of different ways. I'm just like, well, we can fight it out. But when you realize that you have that, it's hard to get people to understand, because what are we doing to dismantle anything systemically if we're not on an individual level trying to break those habits and bust through and deal with that anxiety and deal with that root? You know what I mean? It's like, even if we did try to tackle the system of systemic racism, how are we going to do that except doing the, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, we ain't going to do this. Like, we're going to have to do this at some point or another. Individuals, groups, or everything else.
So that brings us back to this question, and we're coming to a close of what are the practical things. We're saying, what are the things we do on this individual level? What are the practical things that we can be doing to intercede and to stand in solidarity with our Asian siblings, with the folks who are being harmed as a result of this panic, of this fear, this growing fear? What are some of the tangible things we can be doing? We've seen folks talking about, patronage to these restaurants. Go and get your food from Asian restaurants who are losing business. That's a simple thing you can do if you have the financial resources, is just eat at restaurants that aren't getting anybody to eat there right now. What are some other things that folks can be doing?
So this is I think broader. I mean, I'll apply it to kind of the specific situation, and I think this can be extrapolated to the broader conversation. If you are with someone who is being targeted, and you do not share the identities that are being targeted, right? So you are presenting in that sense as an ally. Your job in that moment is to not shout down and be hostile towards the antagonist. Only because, again, this is kind of my perspective as a systems thinker and as a systems therapist. What that does is it reinforces the patterning in that person's mind that the person that they are targeting themselves is dangerous, right? So if a racist person comes up to me and makes some really offensive racist jokes and threatens me, and I've got a white cisgender straight heterosexual woman next to me who identifies herself as an ally to me, but instead gets up in that person's face and is really reactive, what that does is going to keep triggering his reactive reactions. I'm going to be targeted as a result of that, right? That I think sometimes we forget that when we as allies to other identities show up in a hostile way, eventually we won't be around, and that antagonizer is going to come across another person who doesn't have us as the ally around. They're going to take it out 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as harsh on that person as a result of the ways we poured fuel on the fire, right? And I think for those of us, particularly when we have extreme amounts of privilege compared to the person who's being targeted, we have an incredible opportunity and responsibility, I think, to help lower the reactivity with that oppressor, that antagonist, so that they don't do that again, right? If you have the privilege to do so, slow the system down so that person isn't targeted again. Don't make it so that you stir up a bunch of drama, you leave, and then that person gets targeted again because that person was just shamed by this ally who showed up and then left, right? And again, that obviously applies to people who have privilege relative to even the antagonist sometimes, right? It's not saying, if I, as a, queer Korean person, had, a Black trans woman come alongside an ally for me in that moment, and that wouldn't be appropriate for me to ask, because most likely they're going to be targeted even more than I am. It just happens in that moment I'm being targeted for being Asian, right? So it's also being cognizant of that, kind of those layers as well.
So practicing de-escalation and taking a moment to breathe and discern, like, what is the threat here, and like what is potentially going to happen next as a result of my actions.
Thank you for saying that, because I'm a name in the space that the last thing I need somebody to do in public is call the cops. Okay. So
yes.
Be very careful how you engage in listen, I'm talking in any public situation, especially folks with a lot of privilege, most likely white folks, who are going to be like, I'm going to step in and be the hero in this situation. I'm my own hero, baby. Like, I am my own hero. It is okay. And I need you to do what we keep telling you to do, which is what we're asking you to do is mirror me. All right. Mirror me. If I'm in that situation, and it does happen, it happens quite often, right? If I walk away, that's what you need to do.
Yep. Yeah.
Don't swing unless and until I swing, which is also a possibility, because listen, anyway, but you mirror me if you want to be my ally, because what you are also saying is what she is doing is the right thing. And so I will do that.
Yes.
And that matters a lot more in that situation than I am right and I will tell you that you're wrong. That's different than saying, okay, and to be just a very specific example, I was in a grocery store with one of my friends, and someone walked up and touched my hair, like literally walked up and said, "Oh my God, that's so beautiful," and like put her whole hand on my head. And I turned around to leave. And she said, "Ma'am, we're leaving. Have a nice day. We're leaving." Like, and very sternly said, "We're going to leave now." "Oh, did I do something wrong?" None of that. Just like, "I'm leaving. And if someone wants to tell you that that was wrong, then they can do that, but we're leaving." And I said, "Thanks for following me out of there." But that was the example that was what I needed. What I needed was for her to affirm that my decision to turn around and leave was the right thing to do.
Yep.
So much so that you ain't never seen nobody follow a Black woman's direction in your life. Yeah. So what does it mean that she turned around and followed me out? Like, that's a very important thing that I need anybody who calls themselves an ally, a comrade, or anybody to understand in situations like this. Also, a simple "that's not true" can go a long way. Right. Especially for people in my position who have a bunch of degrees and know how to code switch real good. You know, a simple that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. You know, I know the authority that I hold with, you know, a bunch of degrees and a code switching voice. When I say that's not true, usually people that I'm around are going to go, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that." Yep. Right. And a simple "that's not true" can really shut some things down before you even get to a dangerous point, because sometimes that's all people need to hear. "Oh, well, I'm not going to China because I heard." That's not true. That's not true.
That's not true. Or I don't understand. What is that?
Yeah, like, let's just keep talking, you know, like, what is, "Well, I'm not ordering from there because, you know, they got the coronavirus." That's not true. Right. But it's not. So if you're hungry, order from there, because that's fine. All right. A simple "that's not true" can go a long way for me.
So we're coming to an end now. I just want to iterate, you know, the whole point of our conversation this evening was to talk about what are the practical things we can be doing. So we talked about when it comes to those that are in more compromising positions, whether as a result of their immune system, disability, mental health. We talked about the ways in which we can be of service to those folks and stand in solidarity with them, from running errands, being physically present, bearing witness to their stories. We've talked about those that are economically at risk, who are being impacted in terms of their finances and their safety and security, and the ways in which we can support them, whether it's hiring them for the services that don't require being in person, or it's, you know, sliding them some cash from their Patreon or their PayPal or Venmo, whatever it may be. We've talked about wanting to stand with our Asian siblings who are being particularly ostracized as a result of this, due to xenophobia and racism, and the way in which we can, you know, go use their businesses, eat at their restaurants, de-escalate situations where we see them being potentially put at risk, taking the time to stand and bear witness to what they're experiencing, and to take their lead is the big message I got. To let them decide how the situation is going to be handled. Before we say our goodbyes, because we really do need to say our goodbyes, I just wanted to name who we didn't, or what groups we maybe didn't get to talk about this evening. I just want to put it on people's minds. I have two that I can think of, and then if you all have any, I'd love to hear those real quickly. I just want to remind folks the impact this is having on those that are incarcerated here, who do not have access to adequate medical, that's, you know, mental and physical health resources, who are in very close quarters, who are doing some of the labor to make sure that we have the resources we need. For example, in New York, Governor Cuomo having that special New York hand sanitizer being made. It's being made via prison labor, in case folks weren't aware. So thinking about those that are in incarceration, and that those are human beings with lives that are valuable, equally valuable to our own, and the impact that this is having on them. And then the other group that I think of that I've had a really hard time getting off my mind today, not that I want to, but it's just been a painful, constant thought, are those in detainment. many of whom are my Latinx siblings, not only, but many of whom are Latinx siblings, who also do not have access to adequate resources, who are in very close quarters to each other. And much like those who are incarcerated in our prison system are already constantly dehumanized, and right now are essentially just being entirely forgotten. So I want to be reminding folks to think about what are ways in which we can stand in solidarity and practically do things for them. Are there groups that work with those populations? So we don't need to be popping up without any skills or knowledge, being like, I want to volunteer. But like, what are resources you have that you can give to the folks that are trained and are capable of serving those communities? Are there any that you would like to lift up?
Atlanta has a very large population of people who do not have shelter. And that is being completely left out of the conversation. What about people who are homeless? What about people who are houseless? What about people, my Uber Eats is here. What about people, come on, thank you. I am a real person. Thanks. What about people who are, who don't have a home to go to when we say go home? In any sense of that word. We got queer people who've been kicked out their houses. So when we say stay at home, what does that mean? We have people who are in dangerous situations of mental, emotional, financial abuse. What does that mean? Stay at home with your abusive partner for 14 days in the ball of stress and anxiety between the two of you. Like when we say, because I am lucky and blessed enough and all privileged to have a very distinct home place. Like I have a house. If I do something that don't work out, my mom is like, I'm never moving. You can always come back. I'm always thinking of people who don't have that, who for whatever reason don't have a home place. And so the conversation that we're having about self-distancing and quarantine, what does that mean for people who for whatever reason can't go home?
Yeah. I think, you mentioned, Jameelah, the risk of kind of people going back to abusive situations. One of the things that I always get nervous about is the increase of domestic violence, of child abuse, right? Because as systemic anxiety goes up, tensions go up, right? I'm already seeing, we have no quarantine up here in upstate New York right now. And I'm seeing my couples become more reactive, right? I'm seeing family dynamics that I've been working for months on break down, right? The anxiety is real. And I know that for some of these folks, it's going to turn explosive. And the fear of not only turning explosive on other people, but also on each other. So I think about the fact that ERs, right, emergency rooms where people might need to go for emergency, mental health services, particularly right if therapist offices have to close. ERs that already do such a piss poor job with mental health and risk around suicide. I don't even begin to know how people will cope, how our healthcare system will cope with that. The other component that I'm thinking about is our LGBTQ elders who have trauma around the last time our country completely and utterly failed to control a pandemic, HIV/AIDS. One thing that I had mentioned, I think on my Facebook a couple days ago, is I'm curious what's going to happen to folks when it comes to needing to get tested because they're taking PrEP, or folks who are on antiretrovirals because they are positive. Folks who need to go in for simple blood work, but on a regular basis, but also because of their health concerns may feel that it's not safe to go into a place with a heightened degree of illness, or simply not being able to get an appointment, right? If we are running large scale testing, for people with COVID-19, are people going to be able to get in for blood work to get their HIV medication refilled and tested for. And particularly, right, the ways that reinforces the trauma to particularly the LGBTQIA community who went through this when AIDS was, much more of a stigma. It still is a stigma today, but even more so, back in the 80s and 90s when our government did absolutely nothing for it, in the ways that people are being re-traumatized, seeing this again, thinking, we are on the cusp of controlling HIV/AIDS. And now knowing the regression that may happen as a result of this, it just absolutely breaks my heart.
One more to lift into the spaces. And this happens all the time, but it's always heightened in terms of medical crises. Jonathan, when you talk about elders, I'm always worried about Black elders, particularly those who have every right to be suspicious of the doctor. Have every right to be suspicious of things like medical testing, of things like, hey, the government says show up to this clinic and let them stick a needle in your arm to see if you have some type of disease or virus. I am always nervous about Black elders in that way, particularly because in this day and age, we talk about stigma and how, elders rely on other herbal medicines and they don't go to the doctor. But we never affirm why that is. We never affirm why that is, and that is a very real concern, particularly within the Black elder community. And while we're running and telling people to go to the doctor if they're sick or not go to work if they're sick, the ingrained necessity of work in a lot of Black elder communities and the very real and I feel like natural aversion to going to the doctor it worries me. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll say about that.
No, that's very real. So before we go, I would love if each of you could share whether it's social media handles or websites or whatever it may be, if folks want to continue to hear and learn from you. If you can quickly just name those, and then maybe when we're done with this conversation, drop them in the comment section for folks so that they can continue to learn with you. Jonathan, what are yours?
So best place to follow me is on Twitter at @GaysianRev, ThatGaysianRev. I'll put that in the link below. Yes, so that's where I tweet. On Twitter, just so folks know, I'm not necessarily the easiest person to find in real life because I do like to kind of keep my social media and my therapy realm separate. So I recognize that's an ongoing conversation that therapists are having regarding social media and our clients and our personal lives. So if people do want to reach out to me personally, if you send me a message, my DMs are open, or you can @ me if you are somebody who wants to connect for coaching, right? If you connect with me that way, I can't see you as a therapist, but I can definitely see you as a coach, which essentially is everything that I would normally do with a therapy client other than bill your insurance. Reach out to me and I'll see if I can find a way to work you into my school if you want to learn more about some of the ways to kind of control anxiety as we move forward.
Thank you. Jameelah?
Everywhere that I want you to find me online, I am Sunny Day Jones, SUNNYDAEJONES. All of my profile pictures are the same. That's me. You will most likely find this, like what you saw this evening, on Facebook. You will find this up a notch on Twitter. You will find absolutely nothing on my Instagram but a bunch of pictures of my notebooks. So that is how each of those spaces exists for me. SUNNYDAEJONES. And yes, my DMs and all of that. Can we talk? Can I book you? All of that is possible with me. Yeah, good to talk to y'all.
Thank you. For myself, one, my name is very uncommon. So if you just Google AnaYelsi, I'm one of like two. But the way I'm known on most social media platforms is as Brown Eyed Amazon. So my website is browneyedamazon.com. On Facebook, my public page is Brown Eyed Amazon. And on Twitter and Instagram, it is also Brown Eyed Amazon, but sometimes it's BRWNEYEDAMZN, and sometimes it's not. So do a little search, you'll find me. We'll drop our information in the comment section here. I want to thank everyone that was a part of tonight's conversation. I really am so grateful to both of you for taking the time to share ways in which we can practice community care together, really explicit ways in which we can be present for one another. I want to send our gratitude out to Angie. Angie wasn't able to join us due to a family emergency, but I'm grateful for her willingness. And she's still somebody that you should be connected with and be learning from. If you want to do that, her Twitter handle is Angie K. Hong, ANGIEKAYHONG. So I recommend you go ahead and follow Angie because there's a lot to glean from the work that she does as well. So I just want to lift up again the things that we're talking about, which are a spirit of abundance, of caring for one another, of recognizing that we have what we need. If government, if systems, if private businesses aren't going to care for us, it doesn't mean there aren't ways in which we can't care for one another and do it well. And so it's about being creative. It's about being generous and open with our many different resources, not just our finances, but getting really creative with what do I have that others might be able to make use of. And that's a way in which we can move through not just this crisis, but really the many different things that are constantly weighing down on our shoulders.
Yeah. No one else is coming.
So thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. And yeah, that's it. We're done for the night.
Wonderful. Peace.
Bye.